כשאני נפגש איתה, אני צריך לקרוא לעצמי רק להמציא סיפורים על טרקים שעשיתי מלפת. וזה אני לא בטוח שנפגש. אתה לוקח את הבחורה שניסית להשיג בשבילי? תדע מה זה. אני לא מתקין לזה. וישבת פה עם הדברים שלי בשביל להשיג בשבילי, לא בשבילך. כן, מה אני שאתה מאחר לשנה? נכון. אני תשיג שתגלה שכזה לא אני. אני רוצה רבה ולא מורה לחוק מורה. מורה, מורה, כן גבוש. מלך שם. מה אתה אמרת ילד? בסדר, בסדר. אני כבר ככה. בבקשה. אני חייב לי. אוקיי, תודה, אני חייב לך. אני אחזור לכם. לא, מחר. אני מכיר את הבית, אני יכול לדבר עם יותר בדרך הזה. מחר, שירותים, אמבטיה, מטבח, חלונות בפנים בחוץ, חלונות בפנים. אוקיי, אני צריך לדבר. איך אתה תרגיש שמישהו לא יכול לדבר? אני לא מתקח את הדייט, באמת. זהו. זהו.
היי. לא, בעבודה. כן.
האמת שגם ככה הטלפון,
מה?
אני לא יודע, אני לא מבין למה נפרדנו, זה לא מסתדר. אני מרגיש שוויתרתי מהר מדי.
אוקיי.
חשבתי שאולי יש לך מישהו אחר.
מה? לא, איפה?
אז את רוצה שאולי ניפגש ונדבר על זה מתי?
שעתיים לך.
אוקיי, את ניפגש בצהריים?
שיט, לא! אברי.
מה, קרה משהו?
שברתי קלט נכון, זה לא שתיים.
לא, זה בטח נורא תשמח.
לא, אני שתיים. אוף, אברי, אני אדבר איתך 5 דקות, טוב? ביי. הוא כזה ארוך, זה לא בחוץ, ובפנים לבן. גובה 25, 30 סנטימטר, משהו כזה, כמה זה עולה?
Good evening. Excellent. Good evening. How are we doing here? Let's give a spin round. We're missing you in person.
Okay.
The whiskey is good, and the learning is even better. So let's we'll get things started. Now, I believe we still have a little bit to discuss regarding the way of who we can count for a minyan. I believe that's where we're up to. At the end of the, you guys aren't letting me move on, so we're still towards the end of the first Perek, 44. We're going to be on page 44, and I'm going to share screen. We were discussing basically who it is that we can count for a minyan in terms of people who are not religious. And we saw that the Bet Yosef had brought down, based on the Rishonim, that you have to make a distinction between people who are just not from, versus someone who's actually been put in Cherem, Monudeh, someone's put in Cherem. And the Shulchan Aruch had similarly ruled that as long as somebody hasn't officially been put in Cherem, they can be counted for a minyan. But then we saw that the Mishnah Berurah had cited the Pri Megadim and others on the previous page, who say that that's not the case when it comes to something which breaks a pinnacle of Jewish faith, and that was actually on page 43, which I just put up on the screen. It's that in source 36, such as someone who is Machalal Shabbos B'Far Hesia, somebody who publicly desecrates Shabbos, right? Dino Ka'akum. The halachic status is like a non-Jew, ve'eno mitzaref. Those are the words that Mr. Brewer quoting the Pri Megadim. That such a person is like a non-Jew and does not join a minyan. Somebody who is publicly desecrates Shabbos deliberately. And that's what we left with nowadays, which is what do we do today? That's why we sort of, so we started going into it last time. So let's, we're going to pick up with that. We saw last time on page 44, source 37, we saw Rav Avadia Yosef, or his son Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, in source 37, who took quite a harsh line and said that you really should not join people who are Machal Shabbos, you should not count them for a minyan. And he was quite strict about that. And he said that B'shat Chak, in a time of great need, there's what to rely on. But he wasn't such a fan. But then we saw, this is what we really left off with last time, in source 38, with the Svara of Tinok Shenishba. And that's what I just wanted to go over. In source 38, the opinion of the Melamed Lahoel, right, of David Tzvi Hoffman, who was living in Germany. So again, in general, they were more lenient in Western Europe as opposed to Eastern Europe on these things, maybe because there was more assimilation. But also, that's where the Binyan Sion lived. And he's quoted at the end of source 38. That's what we ended off with last time. But just to recap what we saw, source 38 there on page 44. She'ela, question. He was asked, B'minyan shelanu, in our minyan, yesh echad or shnaim, there's one or two people, shemachalelin Shabbos b'parhesia, they publicly break Shabbos, lo levad b'mlachtam, ki im gam osim mugmar. Right? Not only do they just go to work on Shabbos, but they also they burn incense. Right? They for recreational purposes, they're also machal Shabbos. But afilu kiddush v'havdalah einam osim. Right?
I think
it means it's not because I have to go to shul, I have to go to work, I'm going to get fired out of fear of being fired. They just don't keep Shabbos. He says, "Vafilu kiddush v'havdalah einam osim." They don't even do kiddush and havdalah. Right, but that's not correct. But that's not the issue that he's raising here. He's raising here because if they're an Ogad about Zara, then there's not really much to work with. But here we're talking about someone who, sorry, they burn things. They're over the Isser of Mavir, right? They burn things on Shabbos. So he started quoting what we've seen previously, the Darash Sion and others in the bold there. That the whole thing was only about a mumma lahachis, somebody who does it out of spite. And nowadays there is no such thing as somebody who does it. People do it what we call a te'avon. Now desire because that's what they want to do, but not because they want to stick it to the Jews, right? That was what lahachis, out of spite, because I don't believe and I want to deny the Torah. And we saw over the page though that in addition there's the svara that if they haven't been testified against in Beit Din, then they're not established as Shabbat desecrators. But then we saw the conclusion was that the minhag is to be lenient, certainly where he was in Germany, that someone who, strictly speaking, maybe you should be machmir, but the minhag is to be lenient. And he ended, and certainly in Hungary, he said as well. And then at the very end there of page 30, the end of page 45, he says, but Efshar, in the bold there, at the end of page 45, the Efshar Samchu al Zeh, they also relied on this, Mashakatav Gamkem Binyan Sion. So he quotes the famous tshuva of the Binyan Sion, Shemachalale Shabbat Bismaneinu, that people who break Shabbos nowadays, Nechshavim Ktsat Katinok Shenishba Levein Hanochim. They're under the halachic category of Tinok Shenishba, a child that was kidnapped and raised among non-Jews. In other words, it's not their fault. That's the way they grew up. Because due to our many sins, Rov Yisrael Barat said, most people nowadays most Jews do not keep Shabbos. And they're not doing it in order to deny our faith. That's just the way that they were brought up. So that's the Binyan Sion is the tshuva which is typically quoted, the Tinok Shenish Basfar. And over the page he also goes over to quote his Rebbeim as well. Over the page on page 46, this is what we ended up with. The Chayin is similarly he gave the Harav Moreinu Harav Meshulam Zalman Cohen Zal. Also Meshulam Zalman Cohen said B'Shem Agon Bal Sholem Eishiv. Shakatav, who wrote Sha'anashim me America, that people in America einam nifsalin alidei chilul Shabbat shelahem. People in America, in the 19th century, are not disqualified by breaking Shabbos. Because that's what the Sholem Eishiv had said about people in America. That's just the Metzius. That is the situation. That's people who grew up that way. That's what they do. He also said the same thing we found in Rabbi Akiva Eiger as well. And reasons to be lenient. So, in contrast to what we saw of Yitzhak Yosef, we have the Binyan Sion and also the Shalom Eshiv who are lenient, and the Malam Noel who are lenient because relying on the Sfaras that this is the minhag to be lenient. Let's see what Rav Moshe Feinstein has to say in slightly more recent times regarding
Rabbi Darren here. Just
Yes.
quickly, what about if it's someone who was brought up from and then became off the derech?
Right, it's a problem, right? Because that Sfar doesn't seem to work, does it? Can't claim Tinok Nishba about someone who grew up in a holy from home, unless you can say, without any names, that the school they went to didn't, do a good job or whatever it is, and therefore they really didn't stand a chance. But it is quite difficult to argue that about somebody who grew up from. And you're right. Moshe Feinstein is going to give a different Sfar though. He's going to give a different Sfar as to why we might be lenient. And that's based on the very source that we saw as to where we learned minyan from. Let's look at source 39, what Moshe Feinstein says, page 46. He says, Ishalti mitalmidi, I was asked by my Talmud, Rabbi Avram Yosef Rosenberg, Shlita, im yesh b'shat hadchak, if in a time of great need, we're able, l'tzaref machale Shabbatot l'asara, that you can count people to a minyan if they're machal Shabbos in time of need. They shavti, and I responded, to minhagain, again in America, according to our minhag, she'af b'shvil yachid parsin l'shamav aram kedusha, that nowadays, even for an individual, we are what we call pores al shma. Does anyone know what that is? It's when that they would allow them to say Baruch Hu, and then everyone else Amen, even though only that person's up to Shema, and everyone else is already davened. So even though you're doing that for a yachid, yesh letzarfam, they may be counted for a minyan. He says as follows: Deha, because kivan shemikra echad elfinan hadin b'kiddush Hashem. Since we learn the whole idea of kiddush Hashem, lehareg b'shar averot, we learn that from the same verse, we learn halacha that a person has to die on Kiddush Hashem for all other averot, other than the big three. Shehu ba'asara, where do we learn that from? That's in the presence of 10. Who are din, and similarly, she'ein omrim davar shebekdusha v'pachot me'asara, and also the din that you don't establish, you don't say a thing of kedusha with less than 10. We learn them both from the same pasuk. Again, the Torah tells us, right, Ada, this idea of 10, right? 10 is where we learn a minyan from. That same source is used for two things. One, to teach us what a minyan is in terms of what an Ada is in terms of a minyan for davening, but it's also used to teach us that in a time of shmad, right, a time of persecution, that a person should be killed rather than commit the avera, even if it's not one of the big three averas, right? Idolatry, murder, and we did that was idolatry. So what did I miss? Gilui Arayot, right? So immorality. So even if it's not one of the big three, if it's a time of shmad, a time of persecution, they're doing it against the Jews. If there are 10 Jews present, then the person's supposed to die rather than do it. And that's learned from the same pasuk of 10 people for an Ada for congregation. And there says Rav Moshe Feinstein in the bold there, and therefore, in the same way that Kiddush Hashem, that a person should die al Kiddush Hashem, is learned in front of 10, even if these 10 are blasphemers, right, and they don't keep halacha, right? Im achem Yisrael, as long as they're actually Jews. Right, it's a problem, right? Not a problem. Kiddush Hashem. He says it's learned from the same pasuk. Same pasuk that we learn the person's supposed to die al Kiddush Hashem in front of 10 Jews, the time of persecution, is from that pasuk, and there the criteria is even if they're not from. As it's proven, Mehada Sanhedrin daf ayin daled, right? That it's proven from Sanhedrin. The Pashit Bayit Rabbi Yirmiyah b'Tisha Yisrael v'Nachri Echad she'en mechuyev ela b'chol Yisrael. Because there it says in front of 9 Jews and 1 Nachri. The Gemara says that's not considered enough. It's rather they have to all be Jewish. The atya toch toch, because we learn the Gzer Shava of betoch. I will be sanctified betoch b'nei Yisrael, among Jewish Israel. Hibadlu mitoch ha'eda, right? Ma'eda hara'ah hazot. Okay. Mimeraglim Shahayu Kulhu Israel. Now, they weren't just an Ada, they were an Ada Ra'ah. Well, the Ada Ra'ah was referring to Korach. So basically, two places it says Ada also, they were bad people, right? There was the Ada of Korach, and there's the Ada of the 10 spies who brought a bad report about Eretz Canaan. For the Perish Rashi. V'hatam, and there, they were absolute blasphemers there in the situation with Korach. And then also with the spies, and that's even worse than people who break Shabbos. They were absolute kofrim, right? They're heretics. Alma, we see from here, in this regard, that people who are mumari, someone who's a mumar, a deliberate sinner, is better than a non-Jew. So if that's the limud, that's the way we learn out 10 people, then the same thing should be true when it comes to 10 for a minion as well. So that's what Rav Moshe Feinstein says. That if it's enough the one person, that we don't actually need the entire minion to be davening. It's enough that one person is davening. So even if they're kofrim, that's okay. And we learn that from the fact that it's the same criteria, it's from the same pasuk for a dying al Kiddush Hashem. It doesn't require them to be particularly religious.
Can I just be clear though? So
Yeah.
we learn this out. You're obliged to allow yourself to be killed for any mitzvah, almost any mitzvah, I guess. Is that because of the Nikdashti Bnei Israel? So we learn out from there that the Nikdashti Hashem it has to be within a minyan.
Yes. So no, we learn it out from the Dereshah of Toch. It says that Nikdashi be said to be Toch in the midst of Toch. It learns in Korach. So
therefore, if it's
how do we know that Ada means 10? Because Ada also appears. No, but we don't. Because Ada also appears like a double Dereshah. Because Ada also appears by the Meraglim, called an Ada. So, but his svara is that if we learn all these dinim and it's the same dinim, then it should apply the same way that 10 Jews there, it's 10 here, regardless of level of religiosity.
If you're faced with this question of giving up your life for in a period of Shemad, but in a situation where you're not with 9 other Jews,
then
there's no obligation.
Correct. In time of Shemad, if it's not one of the big 3, but it is a time of Shemad, it's only in front of 10 other Jews. There's an obligation to give up one's life.
That doesn't apply, I guess. It's not a period of Shemad. We're talking about the big 3.
The big 3 is even for it's even without. Right. Okay. So if we go over the page, that Rav Moshe Feinstein says, because we say that you can say Shema and Kaddish even for one person at Tzedavim. That person can say Baruch Hu and everyone can answer Amen. Aval, but on page 47, Aval ha'ever, la sovrim, according to those who hold, Debai lechola pachot rov minyan, but those who say you need the majority of the minyan have not yet davened. Right? Efshar, it's possible to kivan shalom makaime, since these people aren't actually going to keep the mitzvah, they're not actually going to do the mitzvot, because yesh lahachshivam kolom itchayve, they should be considered like those who are not mechuyev, not obligated. But lechein efshar shelo yitztarfu, people who aren't going to say these things, they don't feel the mitzvah because they've already done so, that should not be counted as a minyan. Could have solved their prima but for us, that we pass in this way, yesh la'asol came b'shat chak. Let's say you day kaddish gushul baruch. No, there's no issue with kaddish gushul baruch with somebody who's not from. So Rav Moshe Feinstein for other reasons, because he doesn't go with the excuses of tinok shenishba, right? That it's like they don't know better and therefore they're exempt from this, from being from this. Simply, the laws are the same as those of Kiddush Hashem. In the same way, Kiddush Hashem is in front of the 10 Jews, however they are. The same thing should be true in terms of level of religiosity as to who we're counting for a minyan. So Rav Moshe Feinstein is given a much more lenient scope and allowed us to count people for minyanim even if they're not from, compared to Rav Ovadia.
Your interesting point is basically bar mitzvah. You're over the age of 13 in regard, unless you're
according to, unless you're a dafka funny, you're funny, right?
Yeah.
But yes, then we accept anyone. That's what Rav Moshe Feinstein says. But there are those who aren't as happy with this. We already saw Rav Yitzchak Yosef, and if we look at the Piskei Tshuva, Rabinowitz in source 40, he says as follows. In source 40, he's a bit more machmir than Rav Moshe. He says, "Aval ein hadvarim omurim ela b'otam asher yesh b'kirbam emunah b'sisit v'vorei olam." This whole thing is only said regarding those who have some sort of basic belief in God. U'mityachsim b'chavod ledat, and are respectful of religion. U'malin b'neihem, right, that even if they're not from, they do brit milah for their sons. U'noagim b'gitin v'kiddushin, right, they get married and divorced the Jewish way. And they have basic knowledge of what tefillah and kaddish is, what it is, what's going on. In other words, so there are those who are not happy to take this as an ironclad leniency, and they say, well, there's got to be some sort of what we might call Masorati, more traditional Jews.
Soloveitchik who was explaining, so why do we take the Mechalel Shabbat as the geder of being like how we judge someone?
Oh.
And he said because Shabbat is when you say Kiddush, you're made on the creation of the world. So someone who doesn't keep Kiddush is like someone who doesn't keep Shabbat. It's like someone denies God created the world. But he said in America and Australia too, now there are a lot of people who don't keep Shabbat, but nevertheless they still say Kiddush on Friday night. So when they say Kiddush, they're being made on they're being made on Hashem as Olam. So therefore you can accept them because they're not such kofrim. But when these other opinions were written, it wasn't such a. You didn't have people who were Mechalel Shabbat and said Kiddush. They just completely.
That Rav Soloveitchik spoke about that, and others as well. Why do we call it Kiddush? Well, we call it what's the opposite of Kiddush? Chilul. What's the opposite of Kiddush Hashem? Chilul Hashem. One who's Machalel Shabbos. The opposite of someone who's Machalel is someone who's Makadesh. In other words, the opposite of somebody who performs Chilul Shabbos is somebody who performs Kiddush.
Yeah.
Right? It's called Kiddush because it's reckoned that act of Kiddush is the opposite of Chilul. Or maybe I hope they don't cancel each other out. But it's also there's this clear like chiastic structure in the end of the book of Shemot, where you have the Mishkan, Shabbos, Chet HaEgel, Shabbos, and Mishkan. And you have the Chet HaEgel in the middle, and then you have Shabbos, and then you have the Mishkan. And clearly the message is that this is the sin that they committed. The Egel is my take. You have the sin of the Egel HaZahav, saying this is what they thought were looking for a medium or intermediary with which to serve Hashem. And it was like, no, this is not how you serve Hashem. If you want to serve Hashem, this is how you do it by abstaining, i.e. Shabbos, abstaining from productivity, from creating. And if you want to be creative, this is how you create. And that's also why is it that the malachos of Shabbos are the malachos that we can't do. So dafka the malachos of the Mishkan are the ones we can't do on Shabbos because they're juxtaposed. But what's the Torah telling us? But the two are juxtaposed. That there's this ratzon, this desire to create and man to be productive and build, right? To be creative in this world, to bring Hashem's name into the world. On Shabbos, you don't have to do that. The day of Shabbos itself is testimony to Hashem's existence. And if you want to anyway build a Mishkan, do those malachas, those are the ones which are prohibited. If you want to anyway do acts of malacha to be productive and create, that dafka is what you shouldn't do on Shabbos, because then you're denying the whole thing. The whole point is you don't need to be proactive on the Shabbos. Shabbos itself is made testimony. So dafka, that's why I think what Chazal are doing when they're saying dafka, those malachas which are productive during the week, don't do those on Shabbos. That's but the idea of Shabbos as being made on the Brit Olam is clear. That's why we take a strong line when it comes to Shabbos. Hilcha Eda as well, we take a very strong line to Shabbos. It's like bare minimum.
This is a really good example of Moshe. There's no light way. He basically said, he went out of his way to find the way to include as opposed to forbid. And this is the basic. It's very easy to offer something. Very easy to say no, but to find that instead of like in America, in the environment we lived in, that people live in today, is different to what it was there. So in this, as I said, let's pick out the one or two good things they do. They make kiddush, they do brit milah, they do, they have a seder of some sort, whatever it might be. But they're included in something as opposed to just reading all of them. That's I think it's a really good example as to how to find the positive as opposed to the negative. When
you read about Rav Soloveitchik, he comes across, he's very conscious of the change in the world from the European shtetl and the United States. And in the 40s and 50s, when he was there, wasn't it? It was modern relative, but it was very different to Europe. And now, 80 years on, it's very different again.
It's also something about Rav Moshe Feinstein's methodology, his gisha. Hilchatit, his methodology, halachic methodology is astounding. But Moshe was one of those people. You read it, it's obvious. Anyone reads a tshuva from the Igrot Moshe by Moshe Feinstein versus if you read Yabir Omer Yechavedat by Rav Yosef. Maybe Rav Yosef knew everyone and everything was ever written on any topic that he wrote about. Now, the rule is they always taught us in yeshiva, if you ever need to, give a shir and Rav Ovadia writes on it, you have to go to Rav Ovadia to read his tshuva because he'll quote everyone else. So you won't miss anyone if you go to Rav Ovadia. You won't miss anything, right? So you've got the encyclopedia there. So, and it's true. And Rav Ovadia will say there's 1,000 people who say X and 1,001 people who say Y, and therefore the halacha is like Y. And you can't contradict him because he knew it better than everyone, right? And that's his methodology, to quote everyone who ever was and then argue and then say what we call klalei psika. What are the rules, the protocol for psak? Yesh stam and yesh omrim and all the halachic protocols. What's the minhag? Maran said this. Maran is the psak. That's what we follow. But when it comes to Moshe Feinstein, he was different, very different. Rather than quoting everyone, he would saying, okay, this is the minhag. Okay, he was what we'd call potecha sugya mechadash. Open up the sugya again from scratch. Find new lomdus to explain why this might or might not be correct. What's the lomdus, right? What did he do? He opened up the sugya and said, well, if you open up the sugya, this makar of learning 10 people, wait a minute, we use that for Kiddush Hashem as well. And for Kiddush Hashem, there's no limitation. It takes the lomdus rather than finding, well, the Melamed Lahol said it's okay. He doesn't do that. He says, let's open the sugya and find where in the sugya we see it might or might not be okay. It's a very different.
He would disagree with Rishonim.
But he would open the Gemaras again from scratch. You read it. He's an Achor. He lived in, not long ago, and he opens the sugyas again from scratch. Right. I mean, and he has reason to do so. He will never overtly go against explicit psak in the Shulchan Aruch. But when there's something ambiguous, he's happy to go back and Moshe Feinstein. Avad Yosef never goes against the Shulchan Aruch unless there's a really, really strong minhag. And even then he goes, and if Maran would have known that, because we didn't have the Meiri at those times, whatever it is, if Maran would have known, he would never have passed in this way. And he without fail, he always do that. But Rav Moshe doesn't feel the need to do that. And this is a classic example. He says, let's open up the sugya. It's an ambiguous halacha. It's not written in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's work out. It's just very different styles. But it's fascinating to learn. Yeah. Very interesting. Now we have to move on, otherwise we're never going to get to chapter 2. Yeah, go on.
Later. No.
Okay. I do want to read the Machshava section just a little bit because it quotes Soloveitchik from his the art site Shiur in source 41, on page 49. The Machshava section here, again, it's a really nice idea. We spoke about minyan. So in concluding our discussion about what constitutes a minyan and who isn't a minyan, Soloveitchik here, he has 2 volumes here called Shiurim Lezecha Abba Mari, and they're called the Yard Site Shiurim. On the Yard Site for his father, every year he'd basically give hours long drush, several hours long, like 3 Yiddish as well, and they were written down, so a different topic each year. So this is from there, and he talks here about what minyan is. What is it that minyan is? I just want to skip there just because of time to the second paragraph there, which begins ulam. See the second paragraph there? I'm just going to highlight it on the screen. Ulam, however. So he says as follows, however. Ulam. Kivan shebemechina ma'asit. In fact, no, I can't do that. I have to read from the top. There we go. You know what? We'll learn some nice Soloveitchik. Forgive me. I'm slowing down the Tzurba pace, but you guys slow me down with your questions, so I don't feel so bad to slow down. So that's good. But so let's go from the beginning. That's what I like. Encourage people to ask questions. Good. Well, we've got Pesach coming up. It's all about asking questions, right? So let's go from the beginning there. So Rav Soloveitchik says as follows: Be'etzem gzeirat hakatuv, regarding the actual decree of the Torah of Shel v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Israel, that I shall be sanctified among Am Israel. Ne'amra halacha muslimet. It said the following halacha: Ki lekiddush shmo hagadol, that to sanctify Hashem's name. Whether according to simple understanding through Mesiras Nefesh, i.e. giving over one's life, al kiyum mitzvotav, she'amod anas rachman litzlan, if a person is forced to give up their life in a time of shmad or because they're being forced to do an avera, or whether we're dealing with simply sanctifying God among people with a davar shebekdusha like Baruch and Kaddish, ba'inan kol Yisrael, right? It's supposed to be all of Israel. Perush, this is what it means, betoch b'nei Yisrael. What does the pasuk mean when it says God will be sanctified betoch, in the midst of b'nei Yisrael? Says Soloveitchik, it means b'ma'amad kol adat b'nei Yisrael, the entire congregation of Israel is present. Ein shmo mikadesh ela k'shekol ha'umah. God's name is only sanctified when the entire nation, Klal Yisrael b'mlu'ah hadsho, when Am Yisrael in its entirety sanctifies God. But rak b'nochachutam kulam b'yachad, only in the presence of all of Am Yisrael together, Yachal hitkayem kiddush shmo yitbarach, can be a true sanctification of God's name. Meaning, really, what's supposed to happen? All of Am Yisrael is supposed to get together. That is when God's name is sanctified. What's the problem? That doesn't really happen. It almost happened yesterday in Israel, with hundreds of thousands of people of Kanievsky's Levaya, and it happened, and 9 years ago at Rav Ovadia Yosef's funeral. But we don't typically get that many people, all of Am Yisrael gathering together. And this is what he says. Ulam, however, kivan shema b'china ma'asit. This is practically speaking. That was their ability efshari l'dorot. You can't keep always gathering together for all generations to come. Nikba'a halacha acheret. Another halacha was enforced. Ki chalot shem Eidah, that the halachic status of Eidah, congregation, chala al kol asara Yisrael. What's Rav Soloveitchik saying? He's saying that any minyan is not just a minyan of 10, it's not just a group of 10 people. That minyan of 10 represents Klal Yisrael, all of Am Yisrael. So he says here in the bold, Ein asara mahavim chativa mesuyemet. These 10 don't represent a specific sect, amatira amirat dvarim, which allows us to recite dvarim shebekdusha mitzad atzma. It's nothing special about these 10 people. Rather, Elahi ba'at kof nitzigat Klal Yisrael. Rather, simply, this group is a representation of all of Am Yisrael. So each minyan is just like a microcosm of Am Yisrael, representatives of Am Yisrael. It is if Am Yisrael are gathered there. It's not just a group of 10, but rather it's 10 which represent Am Yisrael. Of course, it's a chiddush. Anyone who says Kaddish Kedusha with a minyan of 10, it's if he has sanctified God's name in front of the entire nation of Am Yisrael. The Kol Asara Nikraim Eidah B'Ze'er Pin, that every group of 10 is called an Eidah, a congregation of Am Yisrael in a small scale. That's what Rav Soloveitchik says. 10 people is not just a group of 10. It's 10, a minyan which represents Klal Yisrael. And when we say V'nikdashti b'toch Yisrael, I'm being sanctified among Am Yisrael, we're referring to the entire Am Yisrael. That's what Rav Soloveitchik says here. I just thought it was nice to read in our conclusion there. And then we're going to move on to discuss COVID minyan. But first, we'll get there in a minute. Ze'er is a borrowed phrase. It's from Kabbalah. It means small face. Don't ask me too much about it, but it means here in the small sense. In the small sense. Kuzari. You might find it on one of the shelves there. You have to ask Reb Matan.
Okay.
What? Or towards, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So Rabbi, is there anyone that's not going to be included in the minyan then? I mean, do we, according to
Heretic, somebody who's overtly over Devodah Zarah, somebody who does things deliberately, somebody who denies Torah Shebaal Peh.
Somebody who marries in?
Somebody who marries out. There's talks about it. But I think each kehillah needs to consult their senior rabbi. What? To find a carrot. No, we saw a carrot. That was explicit. We saw in the Mishnah Berurah. Yeah, typically they don't come to Mizrahi for Mincha, so we're all right. But
Maybe they hear it.
Sorry?
And what about
what now?
Reform and Reconstructionist Jews, for example?
Say that again.
What about Reform or Reconstructionist Jews?
You have to ask yourself how many of them actually believe it and how many are just doing it because it's a more convenient, or they think it's a more convenient lifestyle. Again, it's the same halachic principles, but you have to, I think each has case by case. As I said, consult your local rabbi. So, okay. So we're moving on now to Perek Bet, chapter 2 there. In discussions of minyan, you need to discuss, well, besides for the people in the minyan, what about locations, right? Can we have a minyan from one building to the next, right? COVID, I think this is the COVID chapter. And this is what's very, has been relevant, although Baruch Hashem, people have come back into shul now. Hopefully we won't be going out again. But let's see the halachic discussions regarding how you can have what we call a tziruf for a minyan, joining minyans in certain circumstances. So if we can page here, we're on page 65. And in source 1, interestingly enough, I mean, it's close because, we're nearly at Pesach. But the Gemara there, or the Mishnah, in source 1 in Pesachim, is discussing the Korban Pesach. And what happens if the Korban Pesach goes out of the boundary where, where it's supposed to be eaten? It becomes puzzle. But what if only some of it? So, well, it depends if it's supposed to be only in the house, or it means out of the boundary of Yerushalayim. Certainly, if it comes out of the boundary of Yerushalayim, it's an issue. But if once it's designated in the person's house, and it's the Rambam and others that say once it leaves the house, it's not. I wonder, do they comment about it here? Yeah, you go. Look up. There you go. Yes. Look at source 1. This is how Rashi understands. The Rambam, look at in footnote 1, holds that this refers to the Korban Pesach not leaving the house in which it's being eaten. Now, there's certain boundaries that the Korban Pesach is not supposed to leave once it's designated. House, and otherwise that piece of the korban becomes puzzle. So let's see in source 1. The Mishnah says as follows: what if only part of the limb goes out the door? Right, they're carrying the thing in, careful, the legs half out the door. What's the problem? The halacha is etzem lo tishbaru, right? You're not allowed to break bones of the korban pesach. So what do you do? So it says the Mishnah, chotech ad shemagia le'etzem. So you cut away basically the meat, right, until you reach the bone, which you're not allowed to snap. And then you basically peel around until you reach the joint, the perek, and then you can cut it off. In other words, because you're not allowed to break the bone, you just have to surgically remove.
You cut meat that's outside the boundary,
right,
cut off and burn off. And then
right. No, you have to cut the entire limb. You cut off the entire limb, so because you can't cut the limb halfway through.
No, but you cut the meat that's out. You cut out the boundary of the property through the meat.
You cut until the meat to the point, right?
So there's the meat that's outside, and then you peel the meat.
And then you peel the meat away until you reach the joint, so that the meat falls off.
The meat's okay.
Right.
And then
well, not the meat that went out's not okay, but the meat that was inside's good.
But the bone, so that you disarticulate.
But you can't split the bone in two, so you have to cut that meat away, get rid of it as muscle, and then they cut through the rest of it. Yeah, and you can have the rest of the meat back inside. What's this got to do with COVID minyanim? We'll discuss in a minute.
What is it?
Peel. Klipa is a peel of the fruit, right? Also, which is about the klipa. So over the page, right, clipper, right? And then I thought you guys were Chabadnikim, clippers, the clippers. No, Melbourne, the clipot.
Listen, we've been learning together for a while.
It's all right. Okay. So over the page, the Mishnah continues. Min hagaf v'lifnim. This is the important bit for us. Min hagaf v'lifnim kelifnim. What if it's in the doorway? What if the leg is sticking into the doorway? So from the doorway inwards, kelifnim is like it's indoors. Min hagaf v'lachutz kelachutz. But if it's from the doorway and outwards, beyond the doorway, it's considered outside. V'ovi hachoma kelifnim. And the thickness of the wall is considered as if it's inside. So if the limb is in the thickness of the doorway, basically it's considered as if it's inside, or in the window, it's as if it's considered indoors. That was all about the Korban Pesach and Psulim, right? Issues with the Korban Pesach.
Between doors and windows, so the door.
Yes, the ovi of the choma is the window. Yeah,
so
correct.
The doorway is if it's the door, it's the internal boundary of the door, and everything that's outside.
But it gives. But it says min hagaf v'lifnim kelifnim, min hagaf v'lachutz kelachutz. From the inside of the doorway inward, and from the doorway outwards. So yeah, you're right. The doorway is an issue. You're right. But the ovi, the choma, the thickness of the wall, like through, if you put it in between the stones of the house, or that weren't smooth, or in the windows, that's like it's inside the house. Okay, that's regarding Korban Pesach. What's that got to do with davening? Says the Gemara there. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, v'chein litfilah. The same thing is true regarding tefillah. That if you're out the door, you're out. You're not in the shul. If you're outside the shul, you're not part of the minyan. If you're at the doorway, if you're outside, you're not part of the minyan. And that's why it's relevant to us. Upliga de Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and he disagrees. Rav, which we just saw, disagrees with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi had said, "Afilu mechitza shel barzel, even a wall of iron, eina mafseket bein Yisrael hayim shbashamayim, does not separate between Am Yisrael and their Father in heaven." There's a machloket as to whether or not if you're outside the shul or outside the room, you can be part of the minyan. And yes, it's loosely related to Korban Pesach, and that's where the Gemara is brought. How do we paskin? So this is a big deal for us. I'm in Beit Yitzchak, 7 a.m. There's only 9 people, right? Right, in the 7 a.m. minyan, and someone's standing out the door trying to beckon people. But there's only, or whatever it is, or looking for someone to switch, that person's not part of the minyan right now. If they're outdoors, according to Ralph. Even if they're outside the door.
Yeah, we learned the other week in such an example. You can say Kaddish, you can say Kiddush in the
Yeah, but person's not allowed to leave. Can't actively walk out.
No, but if he happens to
If you happen to walk out, you could say it, and that guy gets all sorts of curses and bad things.
So
That's not good. Yeah, it's not a heter to leave. You're not allowed to leave. If there's 10. So what does the Shulchan Aruch rule in that last machloket, the Gemara, regarding somebody who's outside the door? So in source 2, the Shulchan Aruch says, Sarich sheyu kol ha'asara b'makom echad. That all 10 people must be in one place. U'shliach tzibur imahem, and the chazan is with them. V'ha'amed b'toch ha'petach min agaf v'lachutz. Kilachutz, somebody who stands in the entranceway from the doorway outward is as if he is outside. So according to this, if I stand outside the door of KOD, waiting for someone to switch me as number 10, I don't count as part of the minyan. It's an issue. That's what this source seems to imply, right? It's an issue you have to be indoors. But this isn't necessarily clear. There's another Shulchan Aruch in source 3, which seems to imply there's a leniency in a case where if I can still see the minyan. And that's the bit which is really under discussion as to how much we rely on this. So let's look at source 3. The Shulchan Aruch there says, Mi she'omed acharei beit hakneset, somebody standing behind the shul, uvenehem chalon, and there's a window in between so they can see into the shul. Afilu gavoa kama komot, even if the shul is a few floors up, but you can see through the window this one person outside into the shul. Afilu eina rachav arba, even if it's not 4 amot wide, the window. Umarei lehem panim, but he shows them his face. In other words, he can see them and they can see him. Misham, from there, mitzaref imahem la'asara. So in contrast to what we just saw, according to this source, if I can see in to the shul, and they can see me, if I can see the minyan, then I count as 1 to 10.
Why is the width of 4 amot, I guess? Why is that relevant?
Which is in terms of deciding if it's really considered like an opening, as opposed to just a hole in the wall, as a separate shift or not.
Of the person.
I'm not sure that's what it relates to. I don't think you don't have to know, because you don't have to be within Dalad Amot of the minyan. You have to be able to see them.
Whether there is the Dalad Amot constitutes a connection, but
Right.
significant connection.
But the point is, right, I'll give you an
Dalad Amot.
example. Let's say here, right? So, if this isn't here, let's say the partitions are open and you have an archway. Is that a separate room, or is it part of the decor, or is it a significant opening? These are halachic shaylas. So in contrast, the first source of the Shulchan Aruch ruled like Rav in the Gemara, that you have to all be in the same room. Then we have the second source, source 3, which says that as long as they can see each other, it's okay. But this is actually learned out from Zimun. And the Shulchan Aruch doesn't just take this out of nowhere. It's learned out from Hilchot Zimun. The Rishonim discuss, if we have 3 people like sitting on one table and 3 people sitting on another table, do they join for Zimun? Or 2 people and 1 person, do they join for Zimun? So look at source 4. The Shulchan Aruch says they do if they can see each other. In source 4, Shtei chaburot she'ochlot b'bayit echad. Right, 2 groups eating in one house, or b'shnei batim, or 2 separate houses or rooms. Imik satan roin elu et elu. If some of them see each other, mitzdarfot lezimun, they can join together for a zimun. But if they can't see each other, einam mitzdarfin, they don't join. So the Shulchan Aruch has this in Hilchot Zimun, and he learns it from Zimun to Tefillah. The Rishonim say explicitly in Zimun, and he applies it from Zimun to Tefillah. So we've seen 2 things in the Shulchan Aruch so far. Number 1 is that really it's supposed to be in the same room, but then there was this leniency if you can see each other, which is based on Hilchot Zimun for benching. The issue is the Mishnah Berurah says so that this is a Zimun thing. It's really a Zimun thing, and you shouldn't rely on it unless you're unnecessarily. And that we're going to see now in source 5, because it is a bit of a contradiction. Source 1 said it's supposed to be in the same room. Source 2 says, also in this source 2 and source 3, right? The first source in the Mishnah Berurah, in the Shulchan Aruch, source 2 had said they have to be in the same room. In source 3, the second Shulchan Aruch, he'd said that if you see it's good enough. And the Mishnah Berurah says you really shouldn't rely on it. So let's see him inside. First, he explains the minhag, and then he says it's best not to rely on it when it comes to tefillah, because really the Shulchan Aruch is quite a chiddush here, applying the laws of Zimun to tefillah. And who says that the rules of Zimun are the same for tefillah? Let's see what he says in source 5. Let's see how the Mishnah Berurah explains it. So he says you can join them with tefillah. The after yesh hefsek mechitza benehem, even though there's a separation of a barrier between them, given de mar elehem panav, since this guy who's outside the shul can see them through the window. Doma lamash mevula kaman. It's like it was clarified later in Kuftari Hele in Zimmer. It's just like Zimmer. The imik satan roinet elu et elu. If some of them see each other, the mitzdarfim that the two join. The imken, and if this is the case, Lefiza, according to this, pashut, it's clear. Ha'omdim be'ezrat hanashim. Right, if for whatever reason there are men in the women's side in shul, or the mechitza hamafseket, or there's a mechitza which separates. Yesh chalon u'mareh lehem panav. When there's a window and he can see them from there, they should join the minyan. For kol shekain, and how much more so, the im yesh bilado asara. If there's already 10 in the room and he's number 11, 12, 13, that nechshav tefillah b'tzibur al yidei zeh. It counts as if you yourself are davening with the minyan. So he says certainly it counts like you're davening with the minyan. If there's already 10 people there and you're number 11 joining through the window, that definitely counts as a minyan. But he goes, as I said, and he says he's hesitant though whether to actually do this. He says, "So afal pichen, even so, yoter tov, it's better. In benakelhu lo lered lebeit knesset. If he can easily go down into the shul, sheyered, it's better that he should go into the shul. The yesh ma'achronim shechol kinal ikar hadin, because there are some achronim who disagree with this whole halacha. The sovrim, and they are of the opinion the inyanenu eino domeh klal zimun, that our issue of tefillah is not comparable to zimun at all. So he says it's best not to rely on this if you don't need to, because you can't really compare. Because even though the Shulchan Aruch took the rules of zimun and applied it to tefillah for minyan, not everyone agrees. So despite the fact that the Shulchan Aruch had said it, the Mishnah Berurah says it's best not to rely on this, that you join from outside.
Interesting division about Ezrat Nashim, because it goes to whether the women in the Ezrat Nashim
Right.
are part,
So
not don't count the minyan, but whether they're part of the kihila in terms of answering both
right.
and stuff like
So according to what his conclusion is, it's best that you can't have 9 men in the men's section and 1 man in the women's section.
that. But it's also the women when it just
Right. So then the
aside from that,
question is, well, does that
women-
mean women aren't part of the minyan?
Yeah,
That's what you're
yeah.
asking, because that means women. But we saw that he says that if there's a minyan of men downstairs, it's definitely considered tefillah b'tzibur upstairs. So if there's a minyan downstairs, it's certainly considered that they're joining the minyan upstairs. The question is whether it's 9 and 1 or 8 and 2. If that's good enough. Yeah, just next door.
If one night we had 9 on the men's side and 1 guy sitting behind the curtain, you would ask that guy to come join the men.
No, this isn't an Ezrat Nashim in that sense. This is one room. They mean like a woman in a balcony, which is a separate reshut, like in Beit Yehuda. Not this curtain. This curtain doesn't count as halachic. I mean, it counts as halachic mechitza for tzniut. That's the words that they use for this. Is a mechitza l'tzniut, but you could put this thing up on Shabbos. This is not a mechitza, and in the halachic sense of a wall.
The case thing is this person who was 15 or whatever the term is, and was traveling upstairs, and I had 9 men downstairs, and I had this person upstairs, and I asked her to be included in the minyan because this person was halachically a male. That's what I'm saying, and it was ruled this person could respond from their shloshim as the 10th person because he was still halachically considered a male. I remember this. He was the whole case. It was in the news. So I'll find it. Yeah, it was amazing. They said it was because he was still classified halachically.
I'm not sure halach is caught up with this whole.
No, I mean halach is definitely. I agree with you. Classified as a male. The question is whether you want to somebody who should be sitting in the women's section, and B, whether that person should be counted as a minyan. 2 separate issues. But I'd be interested to see that. Yes, and then
I'm curious about what we learned here with Mishnah Berurah explaining the halachas of the zuman should not be extended and applied to tefillah. Isn't it? Maybe I'm wrong, but isn't it the case that we often do that? We take the halachic mechanism of deciding halakha and we apply it in more than one case.
So the Achronim who disagree that quotes, the Achronim who disagree with the Shulchan Aruch will hold that the two are not analogous and you can't apply. Because whereas Zimun is all about Gadlul Hashem Iti or Ramash Mo Yachtav, it's about like, hey, we are all praising Hashem. When it comes to this is my sfar off the top of my head, But when it comes to tefillah, we're creating an Ada. Send it to me. We're creating an Ada, congregation, one unit. And that unit has to be maybe that which constitutes a tzira for Zimun is not the same as creating a unit, an Ada, congregation, right? Without ruffling too many feathers. People don't like it when everyone's davening in Beit Yehuda, but there's also a minyan outside, right? One congregation is one building. I'm talking to somebody who davens outside on a regular basis, but what can I do? What can you do? What can you do?
I daven inside.
Sorry?
I daven inside.
What can you do? Okay. I daven where I'm put, right? So I behave myself. I daven where I'm put. So okay. Okay.
I was on phone.
So right, exactly. Let's see the moving on then. Where are we up to?
Number 6.
Number 6. Okay. So we're still 6, or I just lost the place.
Number 6.
Yeah, no, I just said frozen. Okay, fine. So we saw inside the Mishnah Berurah says not to rely on what we've seen. What about where the there are right, what the Shulchan Aruch says regarding half and half, right? We saw what he said earlier regarding like there's one person outside. What if it's like half and half? We look at source 6. Shulchan Aruch says, if some of the 10 are in the shul, some are in the courtyard, they don't join. So here, unlike previously, it was like 9 and 1, right? 9 and 1 person looking through. Here he says that if it's like more than that, it's like some and some, they're not yotza. If half are in the shul and half are out the shul. And again, the question is, what is the difference? And then again, the Mishnah Berurah says this is just dependent on the same machlok that we just seen regarding whether seeing each other is enough to unite the minyan. Source 7, the Mishnah Berurah explains, some of them were in the courtyard. Who are in the same thing is true. Same thing applies again, even if 9 are in shul and it's only 1 outside. It's all about whether or not they can actually see each other, and A, and B, even if they can see each other, according to the Sam Poskim, that's not enough. They have to actually be in the same room. The Pri Megadim wrote, if you'd Zayin, that which we've seen earlier, Mari, that discusses that which we just saw that they're not, that they don't join a minyan. That's when they can't see each other. The Baroin Zed, because if they can see each other, afilu b'shnei batim mamash. When's the Pri Megadim? Even if they're in the 2 separate houses entirely, mitzdarfin, they join. Just like Zimun, so there is the Pri Megadim who is lenient. But there are those who are machmir, afilu baroim, even when they can see each other. Uva makom hatchak, in a time of great need, it's possible there's room to be lenient. So again, it's the same machloket that each if needs to be sort of looked at, but really it's the same machloket again and again, which is that okay, really supposed to be in the same building, in the same room. If they're not in the same room, but they can see each other, is that enough? The Pri Megadim says yes, Achronim say no, and the Mishnah Berurah says only rely on it in time of great need. So COVID, it was typically classified as a time of great need. And in addition to Pri Megadim, we rely on the Chidah that we're going to see inside. The Chidah was the every halachic tshuva written about minyanim and COVID quoted the Chidah, which we're going to read inside. Everyone was quoting the Chidah, and we're going to see him inside. But yes, your question.
Even during COVID, though, I mean, generally speaking, what happened in Mizrahi is that there may have been many groups davening, but each group had its tent. But just take, for example, the minyan we davening, the whatever it's called, Beit Yitzchak, right? So on the right-hand side of that building, you have windows looking out to the courtyard. So halachically, it seems strange. You could have 9 inside the building. You look out the window and see some guy who has a dance, he has to have the same dance to be part of it, and suddenly you've got a minyan.
He's got to be answering. He's got to be joining in. He's got to be looking. Well, then that's kind of an issue.
That was very late.
Right, like in Alexandria.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
So we don't pass like that.
Sorry.
We don't pass.
Well, the Mishnah Berurah says, and placing with chak, and there's a great need. There's room to be lenient. Right. So let's see why the Chidah was it. The Chidah, right? He started off in Israel and ended up in Italy. And they had quarantine, right, in his times as well. The 1800s, they had quarantine as well in order to get into Italy. And you had to be in a building. You had to be in a separate building. They were called lazarettos, right? So he talks about the lazarettos where they had a minyan in only by joining people across from one building to the next. Tshuva, really a tshuva which is brought.
So presumably that was one.
Sorry?
Presumably they could not see one.
No, it's saying when they're like outside downstairs, and then there's people upstairs, they could see each other. So let's look in source 8. This is the tshuva of the Chida regarding joining people from upstairs to downstairs, which is what like I did like at the very beginning of COVID in Israel. So Pesach 2020, you weren't allowed to do a minyan even outdoors. And we had us on the street and then the neighbors on the balcony and then them on their balcony. And we could see each other. The question is, according to the Chida, yes. According to what we saw in the Achronim in the Mishnah Berurah, no. According to the Chida, yes. And that's exactly the tension. The question is it good enough? So let's see the Chida, who then his Masik Bracha, who brings the lenient opinion. He says as follows. So he says, but Lazaretto, in these Lazaretto, these like hotel quarantines from the Chida's time in Italy, which they have the custom of doing in these cities. There are two groups. They're not allowed to come into contact with one another because they're in separate lazarettos. There's 6 in one building and 4 in another. Says the Chida, I heard from one Rav, that he was uncertain. Right? When they're still there, if the 4 are able, lifnei petach habayit, can they go outside into their front garden? V'yitztarfu la'asara, and they'll join the 10. Kivan shero'in zeh because they can see each other. Oh, einam itztarfin. So you've got 4 downstairs in the garden and 4 upstairs looking out of their windows. 6 upstairs looking out of their windows. Do they join? This is what the Chida was asked. And he said there was a Rav who wasn't sure, but he thinks there's room to be lenient. He says, Veli hahediot nireh, and according to me, the simple person, it seems, the mitzdarfim, that they do join for a minyan, even though some are upstairs and some are downstairs. Says the Chida. Why? The hare elu einam yecholim levo b'bayit, because they're not able to enter the building. V'hashomer imam, and the guard is with them. B'sadeh lifnei habayit, in the garden, right in front of their house. The gam asher b'bayit lo yuchlu latzet, and those who are in the house are not allowed to leave. Chutz, let's say chutz to leave. Ki hamakom tsar b'chutz, because the area is narrow. V'gam hu ma'aval rabim, it's a public thoroughfare. They weren't allowed to go there. And in that case, the einam yecholim liot b'yachad mitam hamelech. They're not allowed to actually be together in a minyan due to the decree of the king, the sarei hamadinot and the members of parliament, right? And these 4 have tried to come close as possible to the entrance and stick their face in, just like the case in the Shulchan Aruch. It's as if they have basically shown their face through the window and they join the minyan. And therefore, this case is just like that case that we discussed in Shulchan Aruch. All the more so, like here too, is that the case? Because they're not actually able to get any closer. They're as close as they physically can be. It's not out of choice that they're not together, says the Chida. They physically cannot get closer. V'lo karav zeh el zeh. They can't draw close to one another. The kivan de'ikar kama poskim, since there are some poskim who allow it, nireh, it seems, lismoch alehem, that we should rely on this opinion. V'lo yitbatlu mem yom milhitz palel b'tzibur. And I guess their quarantine was 40 days, right? Quarantine, 40, right? There you go. So for quarter, right? So they shouldn't cancel 40 days of davening without a minyan. So he said, in such a case, it's better to be lenient. And this Chida was revived in recent times, in the past couple of years, as halachic tshuva for COVID. That's really that's what we rely on basically. All these street minyanim. Now we'll end here because there are other questions which we will deal with next time. Other problematic separations to do with other issues besides for just being in a different room. For example, the question of what if there's a street which goes across? Can I join with people in the balcony opposite, or people from one side of Labasa to the other side? That might be more of an issue. and that we'll discuss next time. But we've already seen here, sort of just in addition to our discussions about who counts for a minyan, the question of the tzira, of the actual joining of people to a minyan, to make this idea that we saw in Rosh Soloveitchik's thought about Ada, the idea that we are an Ada, a congregation, and what it is that constitutes that group of people that we saw in the Machshava section. So to begin you next time, Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you.
Take care.